Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring two things that, at first glance, might seem totally unrelated.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're going to be diving into the sinking of the Lusitania, and then we're going to be taking a look at Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy.
All right.
We've got some in-depth historical analysis of the Lusitania incident, along with the deep dive into Allen's book.
Okay.
So get ready for some twists and turns. I have a feeling this deep dive is going to make you question what you thought you knew about history,
Interesting.
and maybe even the world around you.
Well, let's get into it then.
Let's start with the Lusitania.
Okay.
Now, most people have at least heard of the Lusitania, right?
Right.
British ocean liner, sunk by a German U-boat in 1915.
Yeah, pretty standard World War I history.
Exactly. But it wasn't just some random event that got buried in the history books.
Right.
This was a major event that really fueled American sentiment towards entering World War I. But, like you said, there might be more to this story than we realize.
I think so, yeah.
So, paint me a picture.
Okay.
It's 1915, things are tense in Europe, and the Lusitania is making its way across the Atlantic, and then, bam, a German U-boat attacks.
Yeah, it was a pretty shocking event.
The ship sinks. Almost 1,200 people are lost.
A horrific tragedy, no matter how you look at it.
Now, the question is, was this a legitimate act of war? Or was there something more going on?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And the sources you've got actually suggest there was a pretty deliberate attempt to cover up exactly what the Lusitania was carrying.
Really?
Yeah. Even the ship's manifest listed ammunition as part of the cargo.
Hold on, so the American public knew there were weapons on board?
Well, it's not that straightforward. See, the American government admitted there was contraband on board, but their public statements, they emphasized the inhumanity of the U-boat attack and downplayed the fact that the Lusitania was carrying, military cargo.
Okay, so mixed messages all around.
Yeah.
What was the German perspective on all this?
Well, from what I've read, it seems like they needed a way to legally justify the sinking under international law.
Makes sense.
So they claimed the Lusitania was effectively a warship. Their argument was, since the ship was carrying munitions but hiding it from the American public, it was a valid target.
So both sides were kind of playing with the facts, trying to control how people saw the event.
You could say that, yeah.
Are there any other details from this time that contradict the typical Lusitania story?
There are, actually. So one thing we know now is that despite some stories, German school children did not get a half day off to celebrate the sinking. But what's really interesting is that recent exploration of the shipwreck has confirmed there really was ammunition on board, just like the manifest said.
Wow.
This directly contradicts those who say the Lusitania was solely a passenger vessel.
That's a pretty big revelation.
It is.
So we've got conflicting stories, hidden information, a terrible loss of life. What does it all mean?
Well, it really challenges the narrative, doesn't it? Was the Lusitania sinking just a horrific accident? Or was it something more planned, something with far-reaching consequences? Who gained from the way public opinion shifted after the sinking?
These are good questions. It's like peeling back the layers of history to see what's underneath. Each detail kind of changes the way we see the story. And that brings us to Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy.
Right.
Now, this book is all about conspiracy theories, right?
It is.
And this idea that there's this elite group secretly controlling world events.
Yeah, pretty controversial stuff.
So how does a book about conspiracy theories connect to a historical event like the Lusitania sinking?
Well, even though it was written decades after the Lusitania went down, Allen's book, it kind of presents this framework that might help us see the events surrounding the sinking in a whole new light.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the central argument of Allen's book?
It all boils down to this idea that there's a secret group, these elites. They're using things like finances, wars, even manipulating the media to basically control world events.
That sounds like something out of a spy novel.
Right. Allen calls this the invisible government.
Okay, so how does this invisible government work? What are they actually doing?
Well, he dives into that, giving historical examples, and connecting events that seem completely separate. One of his big points is about central banks, like the Federal Reserve. He argues that these institutions aren't really helping the public, but they're actually tools to make this elite group even richer and even more powerful.
So he's saying these big institutions aren't working for the people. They're working for a select few.
That's his argument. And he doesn't stop there. He even claims that communism was used as a tool by this elite.
Wow.
funding both sides of conflicts to keep their influence around the world.
That's a pretty bold claim. What about the media? What does he say about that?
Oh, he believes the media plays a huge role in shaping how the public sees things and silencing anyone who disagrees.
Interesting.
You know, he thinks most major media outlets are controlled by the very elites he's writing about. They can create this very specific narrative that pushes their agenda.
So if we're looking at the Lusitania through this lens, are we saying that the thinking and the way information about it was controlled was orchestrated by this invisible government?
Well, it's a question worth asking. Think about it. We've seen evidence of hidden information, conflicting accounts, media coverage that focus more on the tragedy itself and less on the military context. Could this be an early example of the kind of manipulation Alan's talking about?
It really makes you think about the Lusitania in a completely different way. But are Alan's theories even relevant today? Does he give any real-world examples of these organizations that he's talking about?
He does, yeah. Alan specifically mentions the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, and the Trilateral Commission. He claims these organizations act like meeting grounds for the elite to connect with each other, coordinate plans, influence policies around the world.
So whether or not you buy into his theories, these groups definitely have a lot of power.
They do.
Okay, this is a lot to take in. What does this mean for, everyday people like us? Are we all just pieces in a game controlled by these powerful people we can't even see?
That's a question every listener has to grapple with on their own, I think. What's important is that Alan's work and the Lusitania incident, they highlight the importance of thinking critically, right? Questioning the stories we're told.
Absolutely. So we shouldn't just believe everything we hear, whether it's from history books or today's news.
Exactly. Always be willing to dig a little deeper, look at things from different angles, draw your own conclusions based on what you find.
That's great advice. But I got to be honest, this whole conversation's making me feel a little unsettled. If something like the sinking of the Lusitania could be manipulated and kept secret, what does that say about our ability to understand history, to trust what we're told?
It's a great point. And it leads us perfectly into our next segment. If something like the sinking of the Lusitania, an event that happened over 100 years ago, can still be debated and challenge our understanding of the past, what does that say about what's happening in the world today?
Right.
What hidden agendas might be shaping our lives right now?
That's definitely something to think about. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back to dive into the next part of our conversation.
It's unsettling, for sure.
Yep.
But like we said before, you got to keep asking questions, keep exploring.
You're right. And that's what's so interesting about this deep dive, right? We're looking at a historical event that's still shrouded in all this mystery, and then connecting it to this idea of these powerful forces working behind the scenes.
Yeah. And Alan gives some specific examples of this kind of manipulation.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to war. He argues that these elites, this invisible government, they benefit from conflict. They don't just want to win wars. Sometimes they want to prolong them.
Hold on. Why would they want to do that? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, see, his claim is that war creates chaos. It creates instability. And in the middle of all that chaos, it's easier for them to advance their agenda, reshape the world in a way that, benefits them.
So if we apply that to the Lusitania, how does that change our understanding of the event?
Well, remember how we talked about the mixed messages coming from the U.S. government?
Yeah.
Acknowledging the contraband on board, but also playing up the tragedy, the German aggression. Alan would argue that this is a classic example of using propaganda to sway public opinion.
And that propaganda then pushes the U.S. closer to war, which is what these elites supposedly want.
That's the theory. Alan even points to specific organizations that he thinks are involved in this manipulation.
Oh.
He talks about the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, and how their members often end up in key government positions.
So he's saying that these organizations are kind of like the public face of this invisible government, that they're influencing policy from within the system.
Yeah, that's one way to interpret it. And it's not just the CFR. He also mentions the Trilateral Commission.
Okay.
This group of influential figures from North America, Europe, and Asia. He claims they're working to create a kind of one-world government that would just further concentrate power in the hands of the elite.
Okay, that's starting to sound a little out there, even for me.
I get it. It's a lot to take in, but remember, we're not here to say whether Alan is right or wrong. What's valuable is how his work forces us to think critically about the world,
Yeah.
question who's in control, and how information is being used to influence our perceptions.
It's like that saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you.
Right.
Maybe we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss these conspiracy theories, especially when they raise these important questions about power and influence.
Exactly. The Lusitania incident and Allen's theories both highlight how easily information can be manipulated. And that manipulation, it can have really real consequences, even leading to war.
So what can we do about it?
Yeah.
If these powerful sources really are working behind the scenes, how do we even fight back?
Yeah.
How do we make sure we're not just pawns in their game?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Allen would argue that the first step is awareness. We need to understand how these systems work,
Okay.
how information is controlled and used to shape public opinion.
So being skeptical of what we read and hear, doing our own research, looking for evidence, instead of just blindly accepting what we're told.
Yeah, that's a great start. And it's not just about being skeptical, it's about being curious. Asking questions, digging deeper, looking for those connections that other people might miss. The truth is often way more complex than the official story.
This is heavy stuff, but it's also empowering, knowing that we have the ability to think for ourselves and challenge those narratives that are constantly being pushed on us.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by digging into these seemingly unrelated topics, a historical event like the Lusitania and a controversial book like None Dare Call It Conspiracy, maybe we can start to see the bigger picture. We can connect the dots and start to make sense of these forces that are shaping our world.
It's like we're piecing together this puzzle, and each new piece of information gives us a clearer view of what the whole picture actually looks like.
And sometimes the pieces that seem to fit the least, those end up being the most revealing. They force us to rethink our assumptions and see the world in a totally new way.
So what's the next piece of the puzzle? What other insights can we take from Allen's work and the story of the Lusitania?
Well, Allen spends a lot of time discussing the role of central banks,
Okay.
particularly the Federal Reserve, in this grand conspiracy.
Yeah.
He argues that these institutions aren't just about managing the economy, they're about consolidating power and wealth in the hands of a select few.
That's a bold claim.
Yeah.
How does he connect that to something like the Lusitania sinking, which was about war and international conflict?
Well, Allen would argue that war is often financed by these very same central banks. He claims that they benefit from lending money to governments, fueling conflict, and profiting from all the chaos.
So in a way, he's saying that these institutions are pulling strings behind the scenes, using war as a tool to advance their own agenda.
Yeah, that's one interpretation of his argument. It's definitely controversial, but it raises some important questions about the relationship between money, power, and war.
It's making me think about that saying, follow the money. If we really want to understand the motives behind an event like the Lusitania sinking, maybe we need to look at who was funding the war, who was profiting from it.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because the trail of money often leads to some surprising places.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about this connection between central banks, war, and the Lusitania.
Well, one of the key aspects of Allen's theory is that these elites, these insiders, as he calls them, they often play both sides of a conflict.
Oh.
They might be funding both sides of a war, ensuring that they profit regardless of the outcome.
That's pretty cynical, but I guess it makes sense from a purely financial standpoint.
Right. If you're betting on both horses, you're guaranteed to win.
Exactly.
And Allen argues that this is exactly what happened during World War I. He claims that these powerful financial interests, including those connected to the Federal Reserve, they were financing both the Allied and Central powers.
So in his view, the Lusitania sinking wasn't just this tragedy, it was a calculated move in this much larger game of chess.
That's the implication. It's a chilling thought, right? To think that the loss of so many lives might have been orchestrated to serve the interests of, a powerful few.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about history and wonder what other events might have been manipulated in similar ways.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? You start thinking critically, you question those official narratives, and you dig deeper for the truth. The Lusitania incident is just one example, but it's a powerful reminder that there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
So if we take Allen's theory seriously, how does that change the way we see the world today? Are these same forces still at work? Manipulating events, shaping our lives?
That's the question, isn't it? It's not an easy one to answer.
But we got to start somewhere, right? We can't just ignore these possibilities,
Right.
especially given what we've learned about the Lusitania, the potential for manipulation.
Absolutely. Maybe by understanding the past, by uncovering these hidden agendas and the forces that have shaped history, maybe we can be more aware of what's happening in the present, more vigilant, more discerning, more resistant to all this manipulation.
That's a great point. It's like the saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly. And even if we don't fully subscribe to all of Alan's theories, his work, it reminds us to be critical thinkers, to question everything, and to never stop searching for the truth.
So where do we go from here? What other avenues should we explore to really get a better understanding of these complex issues?
Well, one area worth delving into is the role of media
Yeah.
in shaping public perception.
Okay.
Alan argues that the media is this powerful tool that can be used to manipulate the masses,
Right.
create this desired narrative, and silence dissent.
You know, that's definitely something we see happening today with the rise of social media and the spread of misinformation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about misinformation, it's about the way information is framed, the stories that are chosen to be told, and the voices that are amplified or silenced.
So are you saying we can't trust anything we read or hear in the media?
Not necessarily, but we need to be discerning. We need to consider the source, to look for bias, and be aware of the potential for manipulation.
That sounds like a lot of work. How do we even begin to sift through all the information out there and figure out what's true?
It's a challenge for sure, but one of the most important things we can do is diversify our sources of information. Don't rely on just one news outlet or one social media platform. Seek out different perspectives, read alternative media, be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
It's about being open-minded, critical, and always seeking out new information, new viewpoints.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that knowledge is power. The more we know, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions. Resist manipulation.
This has been a fascinating conversation. But I have to ask, what about the people who benefit from all this alleged manipulation? What are their motivations?
Well, that's a question that's been debated for centuries, really. Some people believe that these elites are driven by greed, this desire to accumulate wealth and power at any cost.
Right.
Others believe they're ideologically motivated. Yeah, they actually think they're working towards a better world, even if it means sacrificing the freedoms of others.
So is it about money? Or is it about ideology? Is it about control? Or is it about creating this utopia, even if it's against people's will?
Probably a combination of both. And it's likely that, different individuals and groups within this alleged elite have their own motivations, their own agendas.
It makes it even harder to understand and combat. It's not like there's just one enemy we can fight.
Exactly. This is a complex issue. There's no easy answers. But that doesn't mean we should give up.
Right.
The more we learn, the more we discuss, the more we challenge the status quo, the better chance we have at creating a more just and equitable world.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to the possibility that things might not be as they seem. And it's made me want to dig deeper, learn more and be more aware of these forces that are shaping our world.
That's the spirit, and that's what this whole deep dive is about.
So what's the next step in our journey of discovery? What other aspects of this puzzle should we explore?
Well, Alan argues that one of the key tools used by these elites to control the world is financial manipulation.
Yeah.
He claims that central banks, like the Federal Reserve, are used to create booms and busts, to inflate and deflate currencies and transfer wealth from the many to the few.
Wait, are you saying that these financial crises aren't just accidents? That they're actually engineered by these powerful forces?
That's what Alan suggests. He points to events like the Great Depression and the 2008 financial crisis as examples of how these elites manipulate the system for their own gain.
Wow, that's a pretty radical idea. Is there any evidence to back that up?
Alan provides a lot of historical data, economic analysis, to back up his arguments. But it's definitely a controversial theory, one that's been hotly debated by economists and historians.
I can imagine. It goes against, everything we're taught about how the economy works.
Exactly. But that's what makes it so thought-provoking. It forces us to question those assumptions, consider alternative explanations for events that have shaped our world.
So if Alan is right, what does that mean for us? Are we all just victims of this financial manipulation?
Not necessarily. Alan argues that by understanding how the system works, we can take steps to protect ourselves. He advocates for things like sound money policies, decentralized finance, and individual economic empowerment.
So it's about taking control of our own finances, educating ourselves about the system, and not relying on these institutions that might be working against us.
Exactly. And it's about being aware of the risks, understanding the potential for manipulation, and making informed decisions about our money.
This is really eye-opening. I never thought about financial crises this way before.
That's the power of looking at things from a different perspective, you know?
Yeah.
It challenges our beliefs, expands our understanding, and empowers us to take action.
So where do we go from here? How can we learn more about these financial manipulations and what we can do to protect ourselves?
Well, Allen's book is a good starting point. He goes into a lot of detail about the history of central banking, the role of the Federal Reserve, and all the different ways that financial manipulation can be used to control the economy and society.
Gotta check that out. But it sounds like this is a pretty complex topic.
It is.
Requires a lot of research and critical thinking.
Yeah, but it's also a really important topic, one that affects all of us.
Right.
The more we understand about how the financial system works, the better equipped we are to, navigate the challenges ahead.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. But I'm still left with a lot of questions. What about the people who are behind this alleged manipulation? Who are they and what are their ultimate goals?
Those are questions that have been pondered for centuries, and there aren't any easy answers. Allen provides his own theories about the identities and motivations of these elites.
Okay.
But ultimately, they are just theories.
So we're left with more questions than answers?
Perhaps, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, The search for truth is this ongoing process.
Right.
And often it's the questions that lead to the most profound discoveries.
That's a great point. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the questions and to keep searching.
Exactly. And by exploring these topics, like the sinking of the Lusitania and the theories of Gary Allen, we're engaging in that search. We're challenging the status quo, expanding our understanding, and hopefully moving closer to the truth.
This has been a truly mind-bending deep dive.
It has.
But I have to ask, what are the practical implications of all this? What can we do with this knowledge in our everyday lives?
That's a great question, and one that each listener is going to have to answer on their own, I think. But I think the most important takeaway is the importance of critical thinking, questioning everything, and being aware of that potential for manipulation.
So it's not just about understanding the past. It's about applying those lessons to the present and the future.
Exactly. By understanding how events like the Lusitania sinking were shaped by propaganda, financial interests, hidden agendas, we can be more discerning about the information we consume, the narratives that we choose to believe.
That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
It's about empowering ourselves to be informed citizens, to make critical decisions, and to resist that manipulation.
Right.
Whether it's coming from governments, corporations, or the media.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping the world around us. By being informed, engaged, and willing to challenge the status quo, we can create a more just and equitable society.
This has been a truly thought-provoking conversation. I feel like I've learned so much. I'm definitely going to be doing more research on these topics.
That's great to hear. And remember, the search for truth, it's an ongoing journey. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never stop challenging your own assumptions.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
So what other avenues can we explore to, delve deeper into these issues?
Well, one area that's really relevant today is the role of technology in shaping our lives. Allen wrote his book back in the 70s, long before the internet, social media, but his concerns about surveillance, control, and the manipulation of information, they're even more relevant now.
Yeah, that's a great point. We live in a world where our every move is tracked, our data is collected, and our online behavior is constantly monitored.
Exactly. And that raises serious questions about privacy, freedom, and the potential for abuse.
So how do we reconcile our desire for convenience and connectivity with the need to protect our privacy and our freedoms?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And there's no easy answers. But I think it starts with awareness. We need to understand how technology is being used to collect our data, to track our movements, to influence our behavior.
So being mindful of our online activity, reading the fine print, being cautious about the information we share.
Exactly. And supporting organizations and initiatives that are fighting for privacy rights, data protection, and a more ethical use of technology.
This is a lot to think about, but it's really important. We can't just blindly embrace these new technologies without considering the potential consequences.
Absolutely. And it's not about rejecting technology altogether.
Right.
It's about using it wisely, critically,
Right.
with awareness of its potential for, well, for both good and bad.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. I'm definitely going to be more mindful of my own online behavior and the ways in which technology is shaping my life.
That's great to hear. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the forces that are shaping our world, the better equipped we are to navigate those challenges ahead.
This deep dive has really made me question everything I thought I knew about history, power, the world around us.
And that's a good thing. It's important to challenge those assumptions. Be critical thinkers and never stop searching for the truth.
So what's the next step in this journey of discovery? Where do we go from here?
Well, Alan talks a lot about the importance of individual action. He argues that we can't just wait for someone else to fix the world's problems. We need to take responsibility for our own lives, for our communities, and for our future.
So it's not just about being informed, it's about taking action.
Exactly. It's about getting involved in our communities, supporting the causes we believe in, and making our voices heard.
But what can one person do? It feels like we're up against such huge, powerful forces.
Never underestimate the power of one. Every action we take, no matter how small, it can have this ripple effect. By speaking out, educating others, and living our values, we can inspire change.
That's a really empowering message. It's not about feeling helpless or overwhelmed. It's about recognizing that we all have the power to make a difference.
Exactly. And it starts with those small steps, Educate yourself, talk to your friends and family, support organizations that are working for positive change, and most importantly, never give up hope.
This has been an incredible conversation. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on the world, and I'm definitely going to be more mindful of the forces that are shaping my life.
That's fantastic to hear. And remember, that search for truth, it's an ongoing journey.
Yeah.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never stop challenging the status quo.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but this conversation has definitely given us all a lot to think about. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. And remember, the search for truth doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an open mind. Until next time, deep divers.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about. But I think you're right. Knowledge is power. The more we understand, the better choices we can make, right?
Exactly. It's all about connecting the dots. Alan argues that these elites manipulate events through financial systems, through wars, even through the media. And when we look back at the Lusitania, well, we see potential echoes of that, right? The way information about the Lusitania's cargo was handled, the emphasis on the tragedy, while kind of downplaying the whole military context.
Yeah.
It all ties back into that idea of, controlling the narrative.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that unsettling feeling you mentioned earlier, right? If events like the sinking of the Lusitania could be shaped by hidden agendas, what does that say about, well, our ability to trust what we're told about history?
It really makes you wonder what other events might have been influenced by forces that we just don't know about. It's like looking at history through this cracked lens.
And that's exactly why exploring these topics, even if they're unsettling, is so important. It encourages us to think critically, to question the information we're given, and to seek out different perspectives, to really get the full picture.
So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways here? What should our listeners be thinking about?
Well, I think the first takeaway is that the sinking of the Lusitania was a lot more complex than, just a simple act of war. The fact that there were undeclared munitions on board and that there were these deliberate attempts to hide information, it challenges the story that's been told for so long.
It's like we've been looking at this two-dimensional image, and now we're starting to see the depth, the layers beneath the surface.
Right. And that leads us to the second takeaway. Whether or not you agree with everything he says, Gary Allen's None Dare Call It Conspiracy offers this valuable framework for understanding how power really works in the world. It encourages us to question those narratives that we're presented with, especially when there are powerful people involved.
So it's not just about accepting what we're told. It's about being, active in uncovering the truth.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that history isn't static. It's constantly being reinterpreted, rewritten as new evidence emerges, as new perspectives come to light.
Any final thoughts for our listeners before we go?
Well, if the sinking of the Lusitania, something that happened over a century ago, can still cause debate and make us question our understanding of history, what does that say about the things happening around us right now?
Right.
What agendas, what hidden agendas might be shaping the world today? These are questions we're thinking about as you continue your own explorations.
That's a great point to end on. So to all of our listeners out there, Keep questioning, keep digging, and never stop exploring the hidden depths of history and the forces that shape our world. Until next time, deep divers.